Thank you for joining us and welcome to another edition of Answers Network. I'm your host, Alan Cardoza. And if this is your first time watching or listening to the show, know that every Monday from 11 a.m. to noon Pacific time, this show will bring on special guests that can inspire, educate, and in some cases entertain, while bringing answers and options to making our lives happier, healthier, and more successful. And I'd really appreciate it if you could all do me a big favor. Please forward one of our shows to your social media group or to someone you know who can benefit from a particular subject. Know that sharing my show and others like it that focus on improved health, happiness, education, and success is just one powerful way we can make a positive influence in the world together. Now, our topic today is consistent with that. Okay, it blends creative thinking with business and personal life success. Now, with thousands trained globally and billions earned for his clients, our guest today, Mark Shekter, has pioneered an entirely new system of creative thinking to empower companies, entrepreneurs, and organizations to succeed beyond their expectations. Now, as co-founder and CEO of the Think8 Global Institute, Mark trains and models startups and Fortune 500 companies to not just rethink, but new think the way they do business. Shaping corporate cultures for explosive innovation, he draws on his background as an Emmy Award-winning Hollywood writer, producer, and composer. In fact, Mark has written comedy for Steve Martin and Jim Carrey, and special musical material for Leonard Cohen, Elton John, and many more. His new book, Think8, 8 Steps to Ignite Your Creative Genius in Business, Career, and Life, quickly soared to #1 in 5 categories in pre-release on Amazon. Mark, welcome to Answers Network.
Thank you, Alan, for that lovely introduction.
Well, I have enjoyed learning more about you and the things that you do. And to me, I mean, you're such a perfect fit for this show because the show is based on how can we help people have a better life? And that's what you're doing all over the world. So again, I appreciate you taking the time to come on.
And thank you. It is very much like you, a passion. You know, when you hit a certain level of success and so on, and along the way, it is very much measured by the response, the impact on others. It is that is the key metric, I think, beyond anything else. And so that's what we live by. That's how we operate.
That's great. Now, before we talk about your new book, please share a little about your career path that took you from Hollywood writer and producer to business development mentor and best-selling author.
You know, I scratched my head about that one too, actually, Alan. But initially, growing up, I loved music. My dad was a musician before a lawyer. My mother was an actress before a social worker. So I had it in my blood, and I listened to all the music I could, the big bands and the rock and roll and everything. Formed a band. You know, art was part of my life, and started writing plays in college. But for me, the arts was fun, but not to be taken seriously as a career because I was going to be a lawyer like everyone else in my family, brother-in-law, sister, everybody. So that was the path until I realized that the real passion was the writing. So through circumstance and just literally forcing my way into offices, you know, that classic story of, how about me, you know, give me a break. Got the opportunity to start writing, not just for camp shows and university plays, but getting into, you know, writing continuity for TV and giving the kid a break, you know, and very quickly I was doing really well and then got called to Hollywood very fast. I was in my early 20s and really made it work there. I fell in love with the business. I was around people who could mentor me brilliantly, and it worked really well. And all was great, but there was something nagging. And the nagging was, well, I have these communication skills, these writing skills. I'm learning so much from these celebrities. And I was early enough to make a choice of, is this my life? I know it's a bit, what is it, existential at that age, going, what's wrong? You know, you got your home, you know, a gated community. And I thought, you know, I think I could use this stuff for another purpose. So slowly I started consulting with my know-how, and this led to really understanding, as we'll get into, the Think8 world. Where I found that my passion was really enabling others. I was fortunate. I had seen examples of those who had struggled in the creative arts and business in general and life. And I went, what am I going to do about that? So from a really early age, and you probably had the same gene, if you like, I was very intent on giving a hand. I was, a very all-star basketball player, but I would sit on the bench and help others get into the game. And it was sort of in my blood to help, but how, And I found through the arts and then the writing and the communication and then the business understanding, I could translate that into something that I could help others with. And that just grew. And it really replaced, though I still consult to those industries, it replaced the writing, the day-to-day into a whole other level of offer. And that's been the passion for many years now.
Well, and it's one of the things that I loved as I was learning more about you and reading the book. But one of the things that I really liked is that you not only are teaching people, but I feel that you're also, when I'm reading the book, that you're mentoring them in how to take the mantle and to pass it on. In other words, not just, okay, I've been taught how to do this, I'm going to go make a bunch of money, but it's use it, do well with it, but pass this information on, share it with your employees or for others that are around you. And I don't think that has been noticed as much as I noticed it as I was listening to some of the other interviews and stuff. And I thought, what can I bring out of this that maybe hasn't been addressed? But that's one of the things that I just really thought was so beautiful about the way you wrote the book.
Well, it's a really lovely observation because it kind of answers the question of why write a book?
Yeah.
And a good question. And it wasn't something I did years ago. It was more recent. I spent some years putting it together. I wanted to get enough proof of concept, respectfully. People read it. Does it work? Well, here's what I found. And after some years, I was able to actually say, okay, I think this communicates the sum of it. But it was very much to, as you're saying, to not only bring it to selected clients and people that we were fortunate enough to work with, some very high-end clients in many cases. It was, how do we make this know-how available? And then if I make it available to a startup entrepreneur or an executive or a professor in university, you're giving them some other tool along with their toolkit to enable others. So the book was really a means to get it out there, get people to understand its value for its own merits, try it out, and then enable others with it, and so on and so forth. I think with any idea and there's so many choices, your podcast, compare how many solutions are offered. So you kind of jump into it going, well, I got one. And here's the proof of, but it's up to you to try it out. And the response has been extraordinarily rewarding, but the intent was try it, if it's going to help you and if it's going to help others, wow, amazing. And then, so that was the motivation of why a book other than I should have a bestseller. I mean, that wasn't the purpose. That it did it, I'm grateful for, but it was because people were asking, you're doing a course, is there a book? And I'm in universities and we're lecturing, and is there a book for this, and yes, it's coming. And so finally it came. And anyway, that was the motivation behind it.
Now, I mentioned in the introduction some of the people that you've worked with. Are there any specific things as to how you think your experiences working with legendary figures like Jim Carrey or Steve Martin, we've got Ray Charles, and so many that you've worked with. Anything in specific in how they influence the concepts that you present in Think8?
Well, the common denominator, which is really kind of the pulse of the book, is how do people succeed? It's a big question, I imagine. Or how do you succeed in life? Let's make it more general. These people achieved an element of success. I'm not saying maybe across the boards, maybe they had family issues and so on. I don't know. But in terms of their craft, they were passionate about it. It was something that I observed that it wasn't so much that they worked hard at it. It was that to the person, there wasn't anything else they could consider doing.
Mm.
I went, now that's a feeling. And when you have that feeling, where does that come from? Or is it possible to ignite that in an individual where essentially that's the option? And a very fundamental moment when I was being interviewed, literally by Leonard Cohen, to write his first TV special, which won many awards, which was a lovely experience. He sat with me and we talked in a deli, typical, over smoked meat sandwiches in Montreal, typical. And we were talking about it. And he said, and I asked him, I said, Leonard, you know, you're asking all about me and so on, but I got to ask you, as a poet starting out, I mean, where's the money? You know, like, how can you predict a career in poem, you know, as a poet? And he looked at me, I said, how did you make that choice? And he looked me in the eye and he said, Mark, I had no choice. And I went, oh, so what he's saying is when you're motivated, when you hit that purposeful sweet spot, that's it. And it ignites you. So that magic, and it's beyond, bless Malcolm Gladwell, he talks about the 10,000 hours. And in my book, I'd even make reference because I've read him, of course. And I said, Malcolm, I love your work. Who doesn't? I said, but you talk about the Beatles and this and that, but you don't mention that they did the 10,000 hours because it was more than passion. There was a motivation, however they started, inside there was an inner pulse. That was kind of the breakthrough for me in working with people going, what is that? Because I felt it. I knew that I could leave law school and pursue it. But others of my contemporaries stayed in law school. They wrote, they were poets, they were artists, they were musicians. They didn't make that choice. And I asked them later, why didn't you? And they said, I didn't feel it. I didn't feel it. And I went, So that began the process of unraveling what it is about Think8 and why it is actually works so well.
You know what story this actually reminds me of are the many stories or the statement of burn the ships. You know, that and that's interesting because I also was in law school and chose what I felt at that point the passion was that I was going to be an investigator and I was going to help young people. I was going to help get people out of human trafficking, and it was a similar type of thing. But when you talk about the other people that continued to write and stayed in law school, the law school was the ship. They didn't burn the ship. But it sounds like with many of these people you're working with, when they said they had no choice, they burned the ships, so they had no choice.
They did. They, to the person, Steve Martin, all of them started modestly. Of course, people go, oh, well, you know, these artists, you know, they were born to it. My God, their path. It's the, never mind what Ray Charles went through, the racial issues and so on. They really earned it. It's fascinating, really. And it was very inspiring to me because on the other hand, people equally, and this was the part two of this, who had that drive, I got to stay with it. And they would stay with it, but they didn't make it. And I don't mean make it like, you know, there's a level. They didn't succeed to their expectations, even modestly. And I was curious about that. I went to college with a fellow who had a hit song, and he was going to be one of the great next songwriters. And then years later, when I went back to a reunion at my college and university, he was in the university bar playing a gig, you know, people are drinking beer and applauding politely. And I came up and I said, so what happened? He said, well, you know, I mean, I went and did a band and everything, but I went into sales. I went, you were the best, man. I saw playwrights that blew my mind in college. Again, it was a formative time in college. And I never heard about them again. And I thought, okay, so what was that part two? You have it, but why didn't it happen? And I got very curious about that because I saw people so talented, not just in the arts and business. And I went, the classic about the writing and entertainment, get a good agent, you know. But that wasn't the solution. It was past that. And that's really where the research continued. Why don't things turn over for people? Lack of talent and then money. That became a preoccupation. While I was writing in LA, in Hollywood at the time, I got interested. And kind of, I think it was brewing, nagging me.
Wow. And one of the things that you emphasized in your book, in Think8, that I really liked was that every individual possesses an unlimited capacity for creatively solving challenges. And I think for many people, they're looking to someone else, or they're working somewhere and they think, well, that's somebody else's job. And the fact that you continue to press on the fact that we all have this. First of all, I think that's great, and I think more people need to recognize that. But can you share an example or a case study where someone successfully applied the Think8 approach and achieved those remarkable results?
Well, I could start with children when I was researching, because this research started early at summer camp, where 7 and 8-year-olds, motivated, excited, could do an hour and a half, 2-hour musical. They could learn all the lines. They could create their dances. I said, kids, they don't have a problem with this. They're just, hey, go and be a tree or be a dinosaur and create a story. And an 8-year-old, they're creating stories. So when I got into the professional things, yes, there were many people that came along that didn't believe. For example, there was a woman who had written a book, and she was from the Bermuda Triangle area, Bermuda. Mm-hmm. And she came to one of my workshops, and she couldn't get it done. She wrote this book and whatever. And it was interesting. And here was a very talented woman who decided to really change her career and get into authorship. And we worked this process. And it was interesting that her motivation was very fundamentally on, how do I get a bestseller? How do I get a book published? How do I make a living making a book? Right? Reasonable. Never asked the question, why does it matter? What is it about writing, never mind a book?
Yeah.
What is it that moves me to make a choice between whatever nursing it was or teaching or something into this authorship? And why is this important? And I realized through this kind of example, and we worked through the process, by the way, she found her personal passion for writing this book. And it was interesting because I think that example's in the book, where she was writing and thought, I'm going to show the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle, from a person who lived there. Okay, that's kind of catchy. But what she didn't get into was, why was that important to her?
Yes.
And she said, why I have to tell that story, because, and she came up with her own personal passion. We finished the course. She went out and got a book publishing deal.
Great.
So fascinating was, there was the material, but the material got reshaped. And what I realized was, we focus on the thing. And to your point, when we come into companies, they're focused, or it's large or small, they're going product or service. We have to improve the product, improve the service, improve this. We have to be more competitive and so on. And I go, you're trying to solve this problem, right? And how is it going? And they go, well, it's tough, and we brought in consultants. And I go, all right, now, and I step back and I take them, start through the process, and I start to go, what is the reason for you bringing this to market, and fundamental process steps. What happens is, in that thing, they suddenly realize what it is that moves them to even be involved in that business. And they go beyond the thing into their personal reason for even joining the company, even following that pursuit. And what happens when they touch that? And this was sort of the breakthroughs for me. When you hit that spot, the ideas come. It's one of those taps. And suddenly, all of their experience, all of their ideas, it's like the inventory of their life experience comes to play. And then I realize don't focus on the what or even the how, focused on the who. If we can enable somebody not just to solve problem A, but ability creatively to solve any problem, we've won. So our work was dedicated to you and getting that capacity up and then turning it loose on any problem. And as obvious as it sounds in some respects, what was missing was, how do you do that? It sounds good, Mark. And then he said, well, here's a process. And they go, a process? And we can get into that conversation because it was counterintuitive to the majority of people going, you just have it, man. You just, you have it or you don't. If you don't have it, hire a creative person. If you're not a writer, hire an editor. Like some of us were born with it and bless us, but the others, the low lifes there, they can't do this, but some are gifted. And I go, no. You have it. Well, how do I know I have it? And then that's begin. So this was a whole area of homework research that got me excited about it. And
no, and I love that. As you were saying that, I was thinking you mentioned Malcolm Gladwell earlier, and there's some of the same correlations there from the standpoint of when somebody is focused so hard on one thing that you need to shift their attention or shift their focus a little bit to get things to come to them more naturally. So it sounds like there's even some of this that you're doing as you're working with them.
As a writer, and you made films, so putting them together, I wanted to find the easiest path. In other words, I like the blank page. My wife Nancy, who co-founded Think8 with me, and so a brilliant Emmy-winning writer herself, Nancy Trice-Botkin, very powerful in her intellect and creativity. She looks at the blank page and goes, "Oh my God!" Right? I look at it and go, "Yay!" Right? Okay. Because I'm seeing, as I'm writing it, I'm seeing it done. So that's kind of a little thing I play. But I realize that people in that process don't give themselves enough credit for understanding that they have it, and they kind of turn off the idea that they could even do something like that. But what they don't know is that there is a way to make it easy, to help them. And that was really the driver. How do I help somebody creatively? There was a study, it's in the book as well, in the 1950s that tried to correlate intelligence, IQ, with success. And they found there was no correlation. And it was a big thing. Let's track back how smart these successes were. Big study, very famous, right? Was quoted around the world and so on, thinking, oh, there must be a correlation. IQ, we can predict. Well, the prediction, these people ended up with good jobs, and very, very few would be what we would consider like intellectual business successes, artists of success. So what was it? And Malcolm, of course, got into the idea of the 10,000 hour thing, and others like him followed suit on those kinds of thoughts. But we find that people innately have it. And then somewhere along the line, and it's very easy to find, you can ask anyone, Alan, it's an interest, and your audience could do. If they're wondering about this, they can simply ask themselves a very fundamental question. Who in your life experience, in music or art, said, implied, or assumed that you could not do X, Y, Z? That you didn't have it? Whether you're a piano player and you would never be a pianist of consequence, if you're a writer and you never make it, that influence coming from some authority kills it off. I've had people who stopped playing for 25 years and then did a process with us, and they're active or artists, and you go, wow, So just that alone was sort of enough proof to say, people have it, they want to express it. Can we give them a hand? And if we gave them a hand on a broad basis, what would business look like? What would your work look like? What would society look like? Getting a bit up here on it, but I do think about those things. Consequence. Yeah.
Well, along these lines, where you were using that example, we have a question that's coming in. And again, I want to take the time to thank those that take the time to send in a question. Many times they send them in ahead of time, oftentimes because they're people that work in the middle of the day, like right now. And so we get these after we send out a press release, and then people send in questions, say, I'm going to be working that day, but please ask this question. And here is one of them. This one says, I'm a writer and I plan on buying the book. In the meantime, what are some practical exercises or activities that readers can do to enhance their creative thinking abilities? And this is from Lisa in Los Angeles.
Lovely question. The first is basically on the lines that I said. First of all, I think, outside of the book, and the book will help, honestly, in terms of understanding where to begin in this process, because it starts with purposefulness. But I would come back to what I was just saying before. Was there anywhere in her life or experience where somebody dissuaded her or said, it was not possible, or think of something else, or redirect your career, or you got to be serious, something like that, that would have kind of put her in doubt? Because that's fundamental to so many cases I run. I've had so much in our courses, tears, and people who've just, life's purpose kind of got blunted. The other thing I would say is the best thing about writing is just start. And here's a big tip, okay? People, you'll love this one. They say, write what you know. Classic, right?
Yep.
I would modify that. Write what you believe in. Write what you have conviction about. Even if it's a drama or a mystery, and you would, I don't know, did you read mysteries, Alan? Are you
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, Grisham fan and Ludlam and all these.
Yes.
Okay. And I say because even in mystery, because I've written, dramas and things like that as well, and mysteries and all that kind of. And what is interesting is even in a fictional thing with the character or the story, I try to understand, why do I care? Other than it's a great idea, it's got a good hook, it should do well. I can't write it until I go, what about it is that I want to say? What is it about crime, or what, like, where am I going with this? i.e., what's the message of all this?
Yep.
So, Lisa, in your writing or whatever, and I can speak from experience because I've run broadcasting networks. I was a writer and I flipped just to get experience on the other side. So I've been intake and was programming director of a very successful networks and stuff. I understand how it looks to receive it. And what I find common, and I'm telling you, is people go, oh, I know about the Bermuda Triangle, and so I'm going to write about it and be real good hook. And I go, why? What are you saying with it? Why do you care? So if you're finding a fiction or nonfiction or documentary, you got to find the heart and the core. And once you find it, then the writing becomes fun, because now, yes, you'll get ideas and you'll draft it and so on, but at least you'll be committed. At least you'll go, I care about this thing. So not write what you know, it's helpful. Research, you can always fill it in. Write what you care about.
Yes.
Write what's meaningful.
Yes. Couldn't agree more. I'm going to ask a question, but then we're going to go to a break.
Sure.
And I just want to say again, I love how your book focuses on the creative potential of individuals in both professional and their personal lives. Because I've read books that's, here's the thing, work, that's keep doing all of this. And then that person is lacking in their personal life, or somebody that, it's like, you got to get your personal life together, and they focus on that. Okay, well, now you're broke. So the fact that you bring both together, I think is great. Yeah. But when we come back from the break, if you can briefly outline the 8 steps of Think8 and how they can be applied in different contexts.
Sure. Okay.
So for everybody out there, if you know somebody that could gain from this, that they could get a little help or something like that, we're going to take a break, but we'll be right back. So contact them, tell them it's time to tune in. They're going to get some real nuggets. So we're speaking with Mark Shekter, and we are talking about creative thinking with business and personal life success. You're listening to or watching Answers Network. We'll be right back.
Conflict International are experts at uncovering the truth. Our specialist team has decades of experience in providing a range of bespoke investigation and intelligence services to companies and individuals. Whether you need professional screening or background checks of employees, due diligence of potential clients or business partners, asset tracing services, or surveillance, Conflict International has a rapid response team on hand to get you to the heart of the matter. Our key strength is in our global capabilities. We can tap into an extensive network of trusted professional investigators based in most jurisdictions worldwide, enabling us to go almost anywhere a case takes us. Conflict International has decades of experience with a diverse range of skills among our team, developed from backgrounds in military and security intelligence services, as well as practiced lawyers. Visit our website today at conflictinternational.com to find out more about our services. That's conflictinternational.com. Global reach, local knowledge.
And we're back. You're listening to or watching Answers Network. We are talking with Mark Shekter, and the book is called Think8, 8 Steps to Ignite Your Creative Genius in Business, Career, and Life. So Mark, share with us a little bit about these 8 steps.
All right. There are 8 steps, and I should say that the 8 steps were developed because of a reductive process. I think it's important to understand, when I was in LA, I was curious about what makes a hit. My agent told me, as a writer, just make a hit. And I said, Elliot, that is the most ridiculous advice you've ever given me. And he said, no, that's your job. You do it. So I got curious and said, well, what makes a hit? You know, because it's a funny business in Hollywood. Very, you make it, you lose it. There's no gray on it. So I studied all the successes that I could identify in film, TV, music, and so on. And in that process, reduced it down to 8 points that seemed common. And it's discussed more in the book in more detail. But those 8 points, not 7 or 9, it's 8, whatever. And I went, okay, and I applied them to myself because I was doing very well and I wanted to increase my sales and opportunities, and did well. And others, my numbers seemed to be larger than the average. And so producers and writers and directors came and they said, well, tell us how you're doing it, you know, over breakfast and so on. I would tell them, and then they go out and suddenly they're selling more and doing. So suddenly I think, well, this is interesting. And it just grew. Yep. The 8 points were reductive. There they were. Now, does they work for business? And I found they did, and so on. So here's the 8 in very quick summary. One was, we don't start typically with the what or the how, which in an 8-step scale, it's a scale of 8 points in priority sequence. In other words, you figure one before the next and the next. People normally start with, what is it and how can I make it better? How I can make my career better? How I can make a better product? How I can deliver better? These are number 5 and number 6 in my 8-step priorities. 5 is the thing that you're making, or the script or whatever, or the business. And 6 is how, you know, procedure and all that. So, but what are the top 4? The top 4 are you. So one is, what drives you? We talked about it earlier. What is that motivation? Not to make the thing, like I want a really nice cup of made to hold coffee. Why are you in the coffee business? What is it about cups, right? Sounds simple enough, but we have a procedure and a process to, you know, amplify that, and people touch a very basic driving purpose, a life purpose, actually, that becomes very powerful. Number 2, so once they have that, they go, well, what do you stand for? If that's the thing that's moving you, what do you believe in? What's your core and fundamental operational principle? If you're running a store, a biologic store, why? And you could say, well, food is medicine. I believe it. So eat well, live well. That is the driving underlying principle upon which opening up a series of, you know, food stores would example. A lawyer might say justice for all, other than good hourly rates, you know. The third one would be tone, purpose, message. Tone is the number 1. How do you engage emotionally? How do you feel? What do you, when you're talking, if you're sincere about it, this is where transparency becomes very evident, because if you have a very powerful message and you sound very sincere about it, and, you know, Alan, it's really important how creative you are. You might have been coached that way to look, you know, authoritarian or professorial, not real. So the tone is the carrier of your purpose and your message. And you see it in advertising where the message and the tone are completely wrong. You've seen movies where the soundtrack doesn't match the dialogue. It's like, so there's a disconnect. The 4th is character. Once you have those elements there that you figured out emotionally and so on, how you want to relate and what you stand for and what moves you, what's your worldview on life? So we go beyond this business or career, whatever, into children and finance, and what's your worldview? What do you think about things? With that in mind, all sorts of things surface. We had a gentleman, I'll finish it and come back. Number 5 was, with that understanding of you, which is you, the who. Now, what you want to do with the insight you have, with the motivation, with the understanding, with the thing that matters to you. Oh, you want to make a car. Okay. And I worked with a company, and they were going to make, they had cars, and they were going to put electric engines in existing cars. So you didn't have to throw your Chevrolet away or your Corvette, you see? It sounded interesting. But when I asked them why they're into it, it had to do with conservation and energy and whatever. But here was the thing. They were preserving cars that should have been junked and gotten to much more fuel efficient. They changed their business and raised $2.5 million because actually they were interested in hybrid and the possibility of taking all the electronics in a car and consolidating into one dashboard. In other words, they were beyond putting an engine into a Corvette.
Right.
That's the content. The structure is, well, how do you go about a business or a life or a piece of art or pitching? That's the line. That's kind of how you go about your pathway. Then it becomes, seventh is your aesthetics. When you're communicating, what does it look like? If you come into an office, if you're standing for X, does it look like X? Come into law offices and there are marble staircases. What's the message? Ouch. Money. Go into other storefronts. People come open tie. It's thing. There's glass. It's open. It's spacious. What's the message? In other words, if you're there for the people and you walk into a place that is marble on the 48th floor with a 70-yard sitting in a lounge to the front desk, and you have to walk across the marble and spiral staircases, what is it saying to you? It's saying, we're here for the wealthy. It's not for everyone. In other words, it's not subtle.
Yep.
Branding, if you like. And then the last one, which is really important, which is kind of the bookend, is the impact. If all of this was done, what do you imagine the result, the outcome of all of your efforts, if it was idealized? In other words, when you dream it, how big do you dream it? Are you like this? Or are you really saying, if I realize my purpose, I'm going to go for it? And I would say almost without exception, Ellen, that last thing, in the largest corporations we deal with and in the smallest, they have trouble with the impact. When I say trouble, they tend to shy away from consequence. They go, I'd be happy with this, but I realistically couldn't do that. And I go, well, your purpose is up here and all of this. And they have to stretch. And they realize, why couldn't they? Why couldn't they? Who said they couldn't? And suddenly the world opens. So when you have those 8 steps, you get what we call a dynamic blueprint, a consolidated, aligned, clearly focused presentation, idea, pathway. And that draws consensus. And as obvious as it might sound, it's a process that is not in use, I mean, increasingly is, where people can't get consensus, can't get ideas shared, because they're starting about, well, what are we going to do about running this campaign? Should we put more money? Should we design it? Should we well, wait a minute. What are we trying to do with this campaign? And then why are we all here? What are we bringing each to this campaign? Are we in agreement? And when you get into that conversation, purpose, that's the step one. Then the conversation is, well, I think we should do this. I think we should handle the poor. I think we should have housing. I think the money should be spent. And you find right there's no alignment. So how is the end product going to work? But if you do the process, everybody contributes. Everybody sees it. A piece of everyone's there. They shape it and they go, there's your vision. There's your creative vision. There's your blueprint. And it's like, it's you would call it, it's physics. All these energy flows are directed. And the power of it is amazing. It's like a laser focused solution.
And I've got a question that is probably geared more towards our more creative listeners, because I noticed that the Think8 book, it's a collaborative effort with Lido Publishing, but it's being released independently. So if you could share a little bit about the reason, I read a little bit about it, but if you could share for everybody a little bit about the reason for this, and how does this independent release enable you to better reach your audience?
Well, on the publishing side, whatever, you can get people who are, facilitating, getting you on and so forth. So companies like Lido and others know and understand a way to help you present, or, the design of things or whatever. The book is the book. It's like going to Random House, except it's online. It's self-publishing in the sense. We looked at that. And by the way, we had it to many publishers, not many, 5 or 6, and it would have taken a year and a half to get out. And we said, and there was interest. And they said, get a bit this and this and so on. So a publisher of Random House or Simon & Schuster, whatever, wonderful editors and so on, all of which we did. But when you're dealing with technology and Kindle versions and so on, you get some expertise, which is great. As people come to us to edit a book and whatever. So it's self-published. And under the Think8 Global Institute brand. That's our brand. So, but the book, I guess, if I'm understanding, is why. So let me understand the question. Is it why why go that route as opposed to?
Well, yeah, why? Part of it is why go that route, and how has, I think you were answering it in a sense. Technology has changed so much that there's so many other different avenues. But it made me think of a story that I remember from an author, a friend of mine, 10 years ago at least. And they were talking about their book, but they said that they were really looking forward to getting their second book out there, because with their first book, as you said, it took like a year and a half till it finally got out, and the publishers got about 90% of the money.
Right.
Wow. And I'm wondering if that's part of the reason for this as well.
I think it is really, and it's a great question. So those authors, creative people, that's a conversation we could have broadly about the creative arts and breaking into music and whatever. I could spend time on that, and we give courses on that and how do people move into that business. And the book will help, I think, understand that process as well. But the reason to go Amazon or those kinds of things and not wait for the launch and whatever was the purpose of why the book was written. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like to make millions on a bestseller. And people go, really? No, it's a vehicle that helps people explain what we do and how it can help them. And what's the easiest and most accessible way to do that? And the most accessible way is make it available. How do I do that? Do I put it in a store? Do I wait a year and a half? There was a demand for this book for 7+ years, probably 10. And I went, I want to get into the hands. I could give, in advance, I sent out copies, just manuscripts, to people who wanted it, universities who were using it and so on. And then I said, no, I've got to make it a manuscript. So the decision to go that way was the intent of why the book. If, as an author, if I'm doing fiction and whatever, would I go that route? I don't know. I might go more traditional. But, Amazon and those kind of outlets now the access is easy. Yeah. The numbers are different in terms of it's not 90%, but it wasn't a financial consideration of return. It was facilitating, like somebody, if you were talking to somebody in your broadcast and they said, I'd like to get my hands on a book. Do they have to go to a bookstore? Can they go, boom? And they can do a Kindle, they can do a paperback, easy. So I'm going, it gets it out there. Now, what happens is on the paperback, when we go and give talks, and we've done to universities, and this has happened in book launches and so on, the group sponsoring us orders a bunch and people get the hard copy, the paperback. Wonderful. But it's getting them into the hands so that then the feedback, gee, this really helped me. To your point earlier, I went and sat down with my group. We read through it. I'm using it already in my team. Wonderful. Whether they call us or not. That's the point. Okay. So it was a choice, but I spent a year and a half, almost 2, researching traditional publishing and talking to them, editors and publishers in the US. Some major ones. Even the former editor of the Harvard Business Review read my book and gave me on the first draft. And I said, I just threw it out. You talk about a little, they say chutzpah, you just throw it out there. And I went, what do you think? And I was going, she'll kill me on this one. This was dangerous, I thought. And she said, really wonderful, and wrote a beautiful, not a formal review, but just a response saying, it's one of, you've done it. You've created a facility and a tool. Then I went and crafted it more and refined it and whatever. But I got feedback at a high level and dared to get the feedback going, if I put this out there, whack, and it was very encouraging, and she was wonderful. just to say, you've come up with something really unique. And I went, great. So that was nice boost of confidence. So I tested the waters before the Amazon solution.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you pointed out that you tested the waters with somebody at a high enough level that they would be comfortable with pointing out any bumps in the road that they might see. And I know that the first script that I wrote, and I passed it to friends. I was showing it to friends and stuff, and they all told me how great it was. I mean, it was phenomenal. And then I sat down with somebody who had written for Disney for 25 years and had been on many, many major projects. And in fact, it's funny, we met on a flight coming back from Paris. And so I asked him if he would read it. Just annihilated it. But I was so happy because, essentially, he said, you have incredible stories and you have, a great amount of knowledge in this area. But you have really no concept of how to write a script and how to take characters and blend. Anyway, but it was so enlightening for me to realize. And then from there, again, not giving up, and I just kept going and going. And like you said, by taking it to somebody high enough, if they tell you it's okay, go for it. But for anybody else out there, if you take it to your friend that doesn't really know, you might want to try it a little higher up the ladder.
Or yes, absolutely. And that was one thing. And the other thing was, I'm very blessed with my wife, who happens to be a brilliant writer, who was the best critic that I have. And she would say, contact's great, your voice, that's not you. And I go, it's me. And I go, no, like, I don't know what you're sounding like, but that ain't you. And in other words, you have to find your voice in these things. And the content was the content, but the carrier of it and the way things were expressed and the language, it comes down to, what are you doing anyway? Like, we can all affect a certain presentation in business interviews. God knows people come in and they're drilled with interviews and they're just not themselves. And you go, relax. This isn't, this is not a death squad here. Just talk to me about you. And they go, okay. And I had an incident of a guy who was a CFO who was out of work for 2 years, brilliant man. And he couldn't get a job. And yet he was like 6'4", all-star athlete, all that kind of stuff. Handsome New Zealander. And we worked, and I said, well, what do you say when you go to these people? And he says, well, I come in as a CFO and I, tell them I do this and this and this and this, and sounds good, right? He's doing content, right?
Right.
He's telling you what he does. And the person would go, well, thank you very much. But we have somebody for this and that and this and that. But we'll get back to you. And 2 years, and he'd never been out of work. I mean, if you saw this guy, you'd go, what's not to love? He's brilliant. And he had a great track record, but he presented it. So we did the work. And then suddenly he comes in there and understood. And I said, you don't know your value. You're talking of what you do, but you don't know what moves you into accountancy and CFO and everything. And he, one of our things that came out with, well, I just make a material difference, figuratively and literally. I just make the difference. I said, do you ever say that? He goes, oh, no, that's me. I go, well, hello. He walked in there and got 5 job offers after that and ended up with a VP and took a whole company public. He just didn't connect with him. So you can have the high end, well, I think the material is really fine and would be appreciated by the business community and the Harvard Business Review and all that. Part one. Part two is somebody who cares enough to go, honey, this ain't you. And you go, excuse me. And we're still together, obviously, because it's a beautiful relationship. and more than ever. But the point is, and we do it for each other, but it's a really good idea, particularly when you write a play, have it read. Get your friends together. We used to do this and have them read the out loud and bring around a table, give them pizza and a beer. I don't care. And listen to it and love the process. love the process, you know.
Mark, I got to tell you, this is so enjoyable for me. I'm getting the thing that, you know, when they say it's time to wrap up, it comes up on the screen. So, but and I actually have some more questions, and what I may end up doing is maybe, if it's okay with you, I'll send them over and then we'll post them online or something like that. I've got a question in regards to artificial intelligence and a variety of other things. But thank you so much for your time. And if I can't post these, maybe I'll have to go to Montreal and try one of those bagels.
We're the best in the world, Alan. And I literally take them to places where they go, "Oh, you're coming? Love to have you. Oh, by the way, bring the bagels." So thank you for your interest, Alan. And you likewise have had a very unusual career path, so you can relate to it. But I would say my final message is really that, and the book can help, and anything that does help is valid. And I would encourage them, obviously, if they're curious for obvious reasons, they could get the book, but that it's all possible. Honestly, it's doable, and it matters if somebody wins at life or things. It doesn't have to be that painful. It doesn't.
All right. For everybody out there, the Mark's website is think8globalinstitute.com. The book can be gotten at the website as well under think8globalinstitute.com/ebook. He's on all social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, and so on. We'll post all of his stuff on our Answers Network website. Mark, again, thank you so much for coming on the show, but also for making a positive difference in the lives of many people.
Thank you, Alan, for the opportunity to do so.
All right. And for everybody out there, be good human beings and be with us again next week on Answers Network.